First, I'd like to thank the chairs, and I'd like to thank everybody who's here today. But I'd especially like to thank Catherine, and I know you hear this all the time, but Catherine is the most energetic and driven human being I've ever met, the veritable Energizer Bunny. Without Catherine, I truly don't believe we'd be sitting here today. So. Now, having said that, Larry also deserves some serious credit. That's her husband, and he's supportive and the behind-the-scenes guy who's always there to say, okay, go, fly off to wherever, and this is your life's mission, so I think Larry deserves a hand as well. So, what was just alluded to, actually, was the fact that during one of our conversations, Catherine wanted to share her work ethic with me. And when I broached the subject of how difficult it is for me to cascade screen my patients, and I asked a few other people on the call, how they felt, and they were having difficulty as well. We came to the conclusion that there was no truly organized system in the United States for active cascade screening, and so naturally it became my job to create that. So with the working group, that's what we've done, and fortunately there have been some great people in the working group, and the secret weapons were Iris Kint and Amy Sturm. Now Iris was in charge of the Netherlands program for quite some time. But first we identified the problem, and the problem, this is bridging the gap. We're all talking about bridging the gap, and we're trying to identify FH patients so that we can treat them. If you can't identify them, obviously you can't treat them. Well, here I have, I'll give you two examples, FH patients in my practice who I try to cascade screen. I do it on every FH patient. I always fail. On these two, I succeeded. One of them was a very young guy who was sent to me for a very high LDL, and I did a coronary CT angiogram on him, and he had subclinical disease that was fairly significant. He had a 7-year-old daughter, and I said, you got to test your daughter. And he actually agreed. So I was like, wow, I actually had some success here. He came in the next time, and he brought the daughter's LDL, and he said, she's fine, she's perfectly fine. I said, well, what is it? And he said, it's 140 milligrams per deciliter. And I said, that's over the 95th percentile for a girl who's 7 years old, and I think you need to watch her as she gets older because, she might have the same problem. So the next visit never came. So he left my practice. That was it. And I tried to say it in a very kind fashion, but apparently I failed. So the other case was a woman who was on apheresis, 40-year-old woman who has had multiple events, and I convinced her to talk to her family, and she spoke to her brother, and I was very happy about that. And then she came in, and I said, how did it go? And she goes, he's not talking to me anymore. Like, what are you talking about? I don't know. He had a very bizarre reaction. So it became very clear to me that I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to cascade screening, and we need some experts to handle this. So that is the problem. Now, in terms of the solution, when you have a problem, you look to people who have already solved the problem, and the Netherlands is where we looked, and you've heard a good deal about the Netherlands program, but I don't know how many of you really know exactly what happened in 1994 when this started. Both doctors Castellan and Seabrands actually drove around to the patients, to their homes, to draw cholesterol levels, to talk to the family members, to actually talk to the doctors. They went and drove across the Netherlands. Now, the difference is that the Netherlands is about a 4-hour trip from end to end, and the United States is a bit larger than that. So that becomes a problem from a geographic standpoint. The other issue is that the Netherlands is the 3rd most densely populated nation in the world, with 17 million people, and the United States, although it has about 316 million people, has pockets of dense populations, but certainly wide swaths of poorly populated populations. So we have a problem, geographic distribution, we have a problem from the standpoint of population density. So we had some serious issues. We had to create a program also that would meet the specifications of our lawyers. We have more lawyers than any other country in the world by a long shot, and so the system had to be impeccably legal, which of course it should be, but to an extreme that is just beyond belief, and it would have to be fully organized and integrated. We'd have to reach out to key doctors around the country, and we'd have to have a key geneticist to help us run this program. So this is just a standard cascade screening process map, and it'll give you some example of how cascade screening can work, and then I'll show you the next slide, which will be what we propose to do. And what we propose to do, by the way, we propose to do by the end of this year. So we will start this active cascade screening program by the end of this year, and next year when we have our 2015 summit, we'll have, Catherine, how many thousand patients? Josh? Okay. Well, but let me just say one thing. So to give you an example of the Netherlands experience, for every patient, for every index case identified, 8 family members with FH were identified. So we have 1,200 patients we've identified. So really there are another 8,000 plus people out there. We've identified probably 10,000 people. So I'll just say that and leave it alone. Okay, so this is what a process map looks like. And you see there are 2 different ways to do this. One is through genetic screening, and the others clinically, and there are different systems, and we all know the different systems to do this clinically. You see at the center, though, is the MD. Now, in the United States, the MD cannot be at the center of this because the MD, as I've already told you, is going to fail miserably. So MDs are usually too busy or apparently too incompetent to be able to accomplish this. So we need to replace that, and you'll see that in our next slide. But we have 2 different ways to go here. We have the passive screening, and we have the active screening. And passive is what I've been doing and what pretty much everybody in the United States does. You say to your patient, Mr. Jones, Mrs. Jones, you have FH, you need to speak to your children, you need to speak to your siblings, your parents. We'll take it from there. And the patient leaves and typically does not speak to them. And you hear when they do speak to them, things don't always work out so well. Active screening, on the other hand, is actually having somebody go out to those family members and discuss the situation with the family members, test the family members, and then ultimately create the pedigree. So that's what a standard process map looks like. Now here you see what we've constructed, and you see in the center here is the genetic counselor, and the doctors are off to the left and to the right. So here you have the doctor off to the left who's identified that index case, who has obtained informed consent so that the genetic counselor can then get the information about this patient. So now what we do is that doctor knows about the genetic counselor and sends the genetic counselor all the information about the patient. The patient is aware of this. The genetic counselor contacts the patient. They have a discussion. The patient then gives the genetic counselor family members, name, demographic information, so the genetic counselor can reach out to those family members. Now, you don't need informed consent actually to do that, but the genetic counselor will contact or will ask the index case to contact the family member first, so that the family member is not shocked when a genetic counselor is calling, and it's obviously the appropriate thing to do. The genetic counselor then, speaking to the family members, will obtain certain data and also obtain more informed consent and actually a release of information, release of records, so that the genetic counselor can speak to all these other doctors on the right. And so now the genetic counselor is at the center, speaking to these other family members, physicians, speaking to the family members, speaking to the index case, and creating ultimately the pedigree. And yes, it is a very large burden on the genetic counselor, but this can all be done through telephone, and you know, the large mass of our country does not preclude success here. And when I was going to say if, but when we build the system large enough, we will be able to accommodate all the doctors and their patients. So in terms of barriers and solutions, just to recap and be a little more granular about this, the informed consent is really not necessary to speak to the family members, as I mentioned, but we will obviously forewarn them. There's an interstate issue with regard to genetic counselors. That's that legal part of things. About 20 states have laws about genetic counselors. It turns out it's not so bad. There are only 3 states where we'll have to get additional genetic counselors, otherwise there's reciprocity. So we can use a single center in order to reach out to all these other physicians and have the physicians reach back and the patients reach back and centralize the whole program. The physicians may be problematic. Obviously, you know, we can be a difficult group, but we'll start obviously with physicians who are very invested in this. Those are physicians who maybe have lipoprotein apheresis centers, who are very involved in FH and in Cascade FH, and then we'll move on to the lipidologists and cardiologists and internists. The end result, of course, will be an FH-driven, pragmatic, accessible Cascade screening program. And that's it. And I have 30 seconds, so thank you very much.